So it's about 9:15 on Friday evening. And how many of you came here tonight after a long week of work? Yeah, right? Just about all of you. We all have to work. And if you work in the information or the service economy, where about 80% of us work, your day probably went something like this. You got up in the morning, and after a 20 or a 30 or a 45 or maybe a 60-minute commute, you get to the office, you spend the day happily typing away on your laptop or your computer. If you're lucky, you get to break the day up with a couple of meetings, right? Everybody loves meetings. If you're even luckier, the office coffee is good, your boss isn't that bad, and you know that guy, that one kind of odd guy from the accounting department, he actually stopped and lingered by your cube a few minutes less than he usually does. You guys know that guy. And then 8 or 9 or 10 hours later, we turn around, do the commute in reverse, and we head home. So that's kind of what my week looked like. I actually commute about 10 hours a week. That's about 500 hours per year. But that's just a drop in the bucket when you consider the size of the American commute as a whole. So the US Census Bureau just did a study that was reported on in the Washington Post. And get this, 140 million Americans collectively spend 30 billion hours and $365 billion commuting to and from work. Now that is just absolutely crazy, right? Think about what we could be doing with that time instead. We could be hanging out with friends and family, we could be engaging in our communities, or I don't know, I think we could be binge watching every John Hughes film ever made, including Ferris Bueller's Day Off, which, for the record, is the greatest movie of all time. But no, we don't do those things. Instead, we spend 30 billion hours commuting. And it turns out that that commute makes us more obese, more depressed, have higher blood pressure, higher cholesterol. And people with longer commutes, they vote less. They have kids who are less likely to do well in school. And if they're poor, they're less likely to escape poverty. So the question is, why? Why the heck do we do this to ourselves? I think the answer is kind of pretty simple. As we moved from an industrial economy to an information economy, what we do for work has gone through a real bona fide revolution, but where and how we work has hardly changed at all. If you think about it, in the industrial economy, you all had to be there at the same time, at the same place, at the same factory to make the assembly line go. And in the information economy, you have to show up at the same office at the same time, the same place to make the information factory go. And so the commute and the cubicle persist at great cost in our health, our time, our money, our sanity, not to mention the great cost of no longer being as engaged as we might want to be in our communities. And this very fundamental nature of work, this very fundamental idea of how we make a living and make a life, has been the central organizing principle of every society in human history. So if we want a better society, I think we need a better way to work. Now, fortunately, I think we're on the cusp of a once-in-a-century shift in how we work. So I want to talk a little bit about that shift, talk about some of the good things, but also some of the reasons why I think we should be concerned. And ultimately, at the end of the day, if we get this shift right, I think we'll end up with a society that's more creative, more inclusive, and more productive. So first, what's causing this shift? Does anybody here not have one of these? Wow. Okay, I have a couple extras. See me after. I'll give you one, and then I also want to know where the heck you've been for the last. So it's interesting, this is for those of you who've never seen one, this is a mobile smartphone. Now, mobile phones have been around in one way or another for 30 or 40 years, but the mobile smartphone is something else altogether. It's basically a little computer that fits in your pocket. And if you're like me, you do everything on this thing except talk on the phone. So 10 years ago, these little devices didn't exist, and now 1 in 7 human beings on the planet has one. making the mobile smartphone the most rapidly adopted technology in the history of the human species. It's absolutely incredible. And I think these little devices are emblematic of the engine that's causing this once-in-a-century shift. Because mobile phones and tablet computers and lightweight laptops and the thousands, millions of web-based applications that run on these things, these are the tools of the information economy. And these tools are no longer housed in big factories. We don't need to house them even in offices anymore because they fit in our pockets, in our backpacks. So that's exactly what we're doing. We're packing them up in our pockets and our backpacks, and we're voting with our feet, and we're starting to work pretty much every place except at work. And so what we're seeing is this great disaggregation of the workforce as we all venture out on our own. Now, the problem is our technology evolves way faster than people evolve. And while our technology has allowed us to go out there and be these free agents, we have evolved over millions of years of human history to work together and problem solve collaboratively. And I gotta tell you, I think we need each other now more than ever. We need each other now more than ever because we have already solved all the easy problems, and the problems left facing us today are complex and nuanced, and they'll require a different kind of problem solving, one based on collaboration, inclusivity, and an empathy for multiple points of view. My friend Mark Greiner, who thinks a lot about the future of work in the workplace, puts it this way: these complex, nuanced problems that face us today, if we want to solve them, we have to seek out the perspective of the many. I love that term, the perspective of the many. And we are going to need the perspective of the many if we are going to solve pressing issues like gun violence, climate change, income inequality, religious and racial intolerance, and the dysfunctional political systems that I think underlie all of it. Man, we need each other now more than ever, and we cannot get the perspective of the many if we are sitting home alone, working on our laptops and our mobile phones. So I think what we need is a new way to aggregate the workforce, to bring people back together to work on their own terms. And there's a great trend that's emerged over the course of the last few years that I think is a model for exactly this kind of reaggregation. It's called co-working. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the term, co-working spaces are these usually membership-based workspaces where freelancers, independent consultants, entrepreneurs, telecommuters, these people who are in the vanguard of this new shift in how we work, they can come back together on their own terms and work collaboratively. Now, these people might otherwise be working at home, alone, in their underwear, with nobody but their cat to talk to. Not that I've ever done that. They may also be working in coffee shops while a barista steams milk in their ear while they're on a conference call or trying to meet a really important deadline. But the really great co-working spaces, they provide these much more professional experiences, but the really great ones focus on creating strong collaborative communities. And I think that's what we need. We need a good, healthy dose of real, live, genuine human community. I've been lucky enough over the course of the last few years to spend time in co-working spaces and to be part of the collaborative communities that they contain. And I've seen some pretty amazing things happen. I've seen people who don't know each other but share similar ideas and similar passions get together over a cup of coffee and a new friendship is born, sometimes even a new company is born. I've seen the independent graphic designer and the independent marketing professional get together and trade tips and tricks and expertise, realizing that just because they work for themselves doesn't mean they have to work by themselves. I've seen people work together to raise money for each other's startups, and I've also seen people work together to raise money for each other's cancer treatments. I've seen people come together to crowdsource ideas for better ways to market locally brewed organic beer. And I've also seen people come together to crowdsource ideas for how to meet social challenges in their communities, like poverty and crime. And I've seen people flock around their laptops and televisions and their social media feeds as the latest news about the latest madness happening across town or across the world begins to trickle in, and then quickly turn the tables and meet that madness with creativity and action. And I've seen people just experience the joy of being able to live and work close together, be able to work how they want to work, and be part of these strong collaborative communities as they seek out and try to give and get something from the perspective of the many. And so I think co-working spaces are a great model for the kind of communities that I think we want to create. Indeed, my dream is that people who are lucky enough to work inside these co-working spaces, when they walk outside into the larger community, they won't even notice, because the community inside the space will look exactly like the community outside the space. A place where people willingly come together to work together collaboratively on their own terms, to give and get something from the perspective of the many, and to make a living and make a life. And I think if we get this shift right, this is exactly the kind of community that we're going to get. Now, the title of my talk is The Future of Work. And with so many things, I think we see our future by looking at our past. Because in the 200,000-year-long history of human work, we have always found ways to come together on our own terms, to seek the perspective of the many and to make a living and make a life. We've always found ways to do this. So the mammoth hunting parties and the trade guilds and the writers' rooms and the quilting bees and the barn raisings and the coffee clatches of yesterday become the co-working communities of today. But I don't think we'll stop just at these co-working communities, because the future of work will be any place with a good Wi-Fi signal and inspiring surroundings where we can come together to work collaboratively and to give and get something from the perspective of the many. So we'll have spaces and places that are public parks and workspaces, public libraries and workspaces, restaurants, coffee shops and workspaces, churches, mosques, temples, synagogues and workspaces. We'll have places that are grocery stores and shopping malls and workspaces, art museums and workspaces. And I think the really great cities and the great communities are the ones that will understand the shift and will intentionally design for it. And in short order, I think we will come to see that spending 30 billion hours every year commuting is a profoundly unnatural act. We'll see it as this profoundly unnatural act, and we'll see it as this mere blip, this kind of tragic aberration in the 200,000-year-long history of human work. And as we come together and seek new ways to get the perspective of the many, I think we'll finally have the chance to take down the artificial barrier that we've erected between work and life. To borrow a phrase from the great Richard Florida, I think we'll finally have the chance to align our economy with our humanity. And aligning our economy with our humanity, I think, is exactly what we need right now more than ever. Thanks very much.